everybody, Meine here, and today I want to show you guys some modifications that you can make to your bass jigs to make them catch a bunch more fish. Recently I've really kind of been thinking about some things that make a good quality bass jig. As you can tell from my hat, I used to be a huge fan of bass stalker jigs. Those used to be awesome. At least until they were bought out by Uncle Josh, and they started making them out of the silicone skirts instead of the living rubber skirts. So they don't make them out of that living rubber skirt material anymore, which is really unfortunate because that's one of the key aspects that I think really makes a real good bass jig. I'm going to show you guys kind of what we can do, some modifications we can make. Right here I have this is a Booyah pigskin jig. It's a 3/8 ounce. I actually picked up about a dozen of these on clearance over at Academy, and I've really been trying to find some good jigs lately that I really like, that have all the essential things in a really good jig that I like. And like I mentioned, one of those things is that living rubber skirt material. That's really important to me. I've had a hard time, finding jigs with that material that have got, the other components, such as a nice strong hook, as well as, especially on these football jigs. Here's one that I've got the skirt off of, but the football jig, I like that eye to be turned perpendicular to the hook, so that it's kind of like a shaky head, and you can kind of sit and shake it on the bottom. So there's a lot of things that go into a good jig, but anyways, I picked these Booyah jigs up on clearance, just thinking I was going to take them and cut the skirt materials off and just tie on my own living rubber skirt material here. And that's kind of what I've been doing with my jigs lately. But as I'm looking at these pigskin jigs, these things are pretty awesome actually. They've got pretty much everything that I've been looking for in a jig. So I'm actually going to keep a few of them just the way that they are. They do have a little bit of the silicone skirt material in them, but for the most part, that's all living rubber right there. So I think that living rubber is really important because it gives the jig a lot more action in the water. That silicone doesn't, those flat strands don't really move around much, but these round living rubber skirt material really kind of breathes in the water, and I think gives it a much more lifelike action. So anyways, I'm going to show you guys how we can tie on some of our own skirt material. So like I said, what I did was, first thing I did is, I took one of these jigs and I cut the skirt material off. All the ones I got on clearance were in this same color. I don't quite want them all that color. So right now I'm going to tie one up that's just straight black. And the first thing I did, like I said, was cut off the skirt material that was originally on it. And now I've got some living rubber skirt material. This usually just comes in like a flat piece like this, and it's a bunch of individual strands that are stuck together, and once we get it tied on there, we can separate all the strands. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie this new skirt material on here. I like, another thing that I like about these Booyah jigs is I noticed that these skirts are actually tied on here. They don't use like a rubber band, a rubber collar type thing. Those things are crap. They, deteriorate and rot and just break, after several months, and, your skirts end up falling off all the time. So, that's another important thing in a jig, is to make sure you get one where the skirt material is tied on. I'm actually going to use a little bit of craft wire to tie mine on. It's just a little bit quicker than doing the thread. Just kind of whatever you prefer, thread or the craft wire, whatever. So once you've got the living rubber skirt material on there, you can see it's still all stuck together. So now you can take some time to go ahead and separate all of the strands so that they're not connected anymore. Okay, so now we already have the first modification to our jig made, and that modification was to tie on living rubber skirt material. Like I said, it gives a whole lot more life to that jig than the silicone stuff does. So swap out those silicone skirts and put on some living rubber. The next modification that we're going to make is we are going to trim the jig skirt just a little bit. So usually what I'll do is I'll kind of pin down all of the skirt material, try and get it all bunched up nice and tight down here. And what I do is I try and trim the skirt probably about 1/4 of an inch or so past the hook, and as well as I kind of trim it at an angle. So I'll show you here. So there's all the skirt material. So I'm basically going to kind of cut at an angle on the sides. So I'm going to cut down at angles there and kind of trim the bottom up just a little bit. So first I'm just going to trim the bottom so the bottom's nice and even. Okay, now I'm going to take these edges and kind of trim them up at an angle a bit. Here we go. See, so just like that. I don't know how well you can see that, but there it is. And voila, there's Mr. Jig. Now, the next and last modification to make to your jig is to trim the weed guard. Now, a lot of guys trim the weed guard kind of goofy. What they do when they think about trimming a weed guard is they straight up just shorten that weed guard, and they cut, probably about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch off the end of the weed guard. The problem with that is, yeah, you may be increasing your hookup ratios, but you're also increasing your snag up ratios. You know, you're flipping into heavy cover and stuff. You know, you shorten that weed guard and you're going to be getting hung up a lot. So this is a trick that I actually learned from a guy back in California when I was a teenager who was a guide out on the Delta. And he was a really respected jig fisherman, and did really well in tournaments with jigs, and he's known as kind of the jig guy. And what he would do, instead of trimming that whole weed guard, he would just take the skirt material, or not the skirt material, but the weed guard, and he would trim about 8 to 10 strands of that weed guard in half. See? So I don't know how well you can see that. I'll try and get good and close here, but it's all kind of black, I guess. But select 8 to 10 of those fibers in that weed guard just kind of throughout the jig. I'll go ahead and kind of demonstrate on this one. So there's one, and I'm just going to cut it in half, just like that. And there's another one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we'll just do two more, 7, 8. All right. So now half of those weed guards are cut in half. The other half are still nice and long to cover up that hook. So what this does is you're going to increase your hookup ratio on fish, yet it still has plenty of coverage on that hook for coming through cover. So it gives you a little bit more give when you set that hook trying to penetrate into a fish, but at the same time, if you're trying to ease it through cover and stuff, it's going to come through just fine as well. So there you have it. There's all the tricks you need to know on making the perfect bass jig. I'm ready to go out and catch a 10-pounder now. Good luck, you guys.